Chapter 11. I'm Doomed. 1. Sej sat all alone in her chair as she waited for Rayton to return for her. The talk was getting longer and she couldn't sense Rayton's presence or his shadow approaching this place. Even the maids had started to remove all the empty dishes and clear the room. Did he leave her alone on purpose? Sej started to look around and frowned while rubbing her full belly. It had been too much for her. The atmosphere during the dinner had been awkward, but in addition to that, she had to eat all the foods that Lise recommended to her. Now, she felt sick and nauseous. Sej closed her mouth to stop herself from vomiting. The bitter taste of bile reached her tongue. How troublesome.
I'm going to find an empty room somewhere and just puke like crazy. That would be a better choice than what I have to deal with now.
Sej rose from her seat quickly.
Yeah, it would be better to not see Big Brother Rayton again. It must be better that way. I will go back to my palace quickly and vomit, then I'll ask Luna to give me some medicine to help with digestion.
Sej thought that was her plan as she walked towards the door, but before she could reach the doorknob, it opened.
Huh?
Sej poked her head towards the door and stopped. She looked at the person blocking her way.
Big Brother Rayton.
The person standing in front of the door was Rayton, who also coincidentally happened to be the most annoying person in the world at the moment. Sej started to stutter without realizing it. His sudden appearance had surprised her so much that her nausea stopped. Rayton stared at Sej without saying a single word to her before walking ahead.
Does he want me to follow him? No, I mean, I can follow him now. That's the only way to go out anyway. Oh, right. The present. I need to give him the present.
Sej, who had been hesitating, began to chase after Rayton wordlessly. Much to her surprise, the place that Rayton was heading to was Set's palace.
I thought he was going to leave me alone. It must have been hard to ignore Liza's words.
While she thought about that, Sej struggled to keep up with Rayton's pace. She didn't know whether it was due to his long legs or the fact that he took long strides, but Rayton walked very quickly. Sej felt like she was going to die trying to chase after him and match his pace.
I don't know what his problem is, but I'm having a hard time following him. I wish I had the courage to say, "Brother, please walk a little slower."
So Sej could only follow him in silence. Not long after, Rayton and Sej reached her palace.
Had I known this would happen to me, I would have rather asked Lise to deliver the present to him.
But there was no time to regret the past. She had to deliver the present now before things got worse.
Big Brother, please wait a minute. Big Brother Rayton?
Rayton came to halt and stared at Sej standing far behind him. Though it was a little intimidating for her when those red eyes glared at her in the dark, like the way a beast looks at its prey, Sej mustered up the courage to speak.
Thank you for escorting me. I also enjoyed the dinner. And this.
Sej pulled out the small jewelry box from under one of her arms and opened the lid. There was a jewel with a ruby placed inside of it. She wasn't able to call a merchant, so she had picked the most expensive jewel in her possession as a present. It was a tough decision and she almost cried when she made up her mind on this. She didn't know how things worked outside the imperial palace, but she was sure that if she had sold this jewel, she would have been able to eat for a few months. She couldn't help it since this was the only chance she had to seek his favor and avoid meeting death again in that way. Also, rubies were the most valuable of gems. The jewel she presented him glowed as brightly as his eyes. It was not a bad gift at all.
It's a birthday present for you, and I think it looks like Big Brother's eyes. You might think of this present as nothing, but this is the only precious thing that I've ever had. Big Bra.
Before Sej could even finish calling his name, Rayton reached out to her, snatched the jewelry box, and threw the entire thing away without even looking at it properly. Set's blue eyes watched in bewilderment as the box rolled on the floor. She found herself unable to do anything except stare at the floor with a dazed expression. Rayton's hand suddenly grabbed her collar. Sej yelled out and looked at Rayton, frightened. His red eyes looked down at his sister coldly. Chapter 12, I'm doomed, 2.
And there is a deep hatred and disgust within him. He even had that same look when he mercilessly slashed my neck.
I don't know what you're thinking, but listen, you damned girl.
Huh?
You better be aware that I have no intention of staying close to the likes of you.
Why?
Sej stammered to herself. Rayton didn't answer for a moment, then suddenly grabbed Set's hair with his other hand. It was so painful that Set's eyes began to swell with tears.
Blonde hair and blue eyes. All of the people in the Imperial Palace look the same and stick close together. Just like birds, flocking together with their companions.
Big Brother Rayton.
I know what the Imperial people think of us. So do you. And what of it? I hate the likes of you. Even more than the hate you show me, to the point where I want to kill you all.
No, wait, you think this is my fault? I didn't even do anything wrong towards you. I'm not even doing the same things that I did in the past.
Of course, Sej didn't say that out loud because she still wanted to live.
You're filthy.
Rayton finally released Sej as if he were ridding himself of a bug. He even clapped his hands together roughly like one would do when patting themselves clean. Sej staggered and breathed heavily.
Get away from me.
But I really feel like vomiting.
As she lost her balance, Sej slammed her face right into Rayton's chest. Then,
What?
at that moment, all the things that Sej had eaten hurled forth and splattered upon them like a waterfall. She saw that Rayton's clothes had become soaked and dirty with her illness.
I'm doomed.
A cold silence fell between them. Sej, who freed herself from Rayton's chest, looked up to see his reaction. Rayton didn't move an inch.
He seems like someone who doesn't understand what just happened. Maybe he's just dumbfounded, or maybe both.
Seeing him like this, Sej began to wipe Rayton's clothes with her sleeve. Of course, it was of no use. Far from becoming better, it was getting worse.
I'm doomed.
Sej paled and opened her lips, quivering.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do this. Really, I am.
Rayton interrupted her by pushing Sej away.
Ah!
She fell backwards and screamed, and Rayton glared at her as if he really wanted to kill her right now.
Am I going to die now? Because I threw up on him once.
Sej shivered and trembled in fear, but Rayton neither killed Sej nor hit her. He left her alone while muttering things like, "Damn it," or "stupid girl," among other curse words. Sej, who was left alone, didn't move an inch until Rayton's back disappeared from view. It was more like she had been frozen in place. She was afraid that once she turned around, he would run back towards her, but Rayton had disappeared. After waiting for a long time, Sej sighed in relief.
I almost died.
It was really unexpected. I thought he was going to at least hit me. Honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if he slapped me a couple of times. Well, I'm glad though. But it looks like the plan to curry favor with him has failed and been cancelled already. No, I'm sure there'll be another chance to try again later.
Sej tried to comfort herself. At least now, after vomiting, she felt a little better. As she got up, she tried to pick up the jewelry box and the ruby that had been left lying on the floor. She was extremely relieved and tired that the day's ordeal was over. All she wanted to do now was go back, take a bath, and change out of her dirty, vomit-ridden clothes. She was still afraid because Rayton was supposed to teach her Kazaki, but she decided to think about it tomorrow. Chapter 13, Stop. I'm fine, 1.
Your Highness. What happened?
Luna exclaimed upon seeing Sej return to the palace.
Oh Lord, look at your face.
I just had an upset stomach.
Sej explained before adding.
Rayton didn't do anything to me. Far from doing anything that could harm me, he even escorted me to the palace by himself. I'm not lying.
Luna was so surprised by Set's statements that she couldn't even formulate a proper reply and only stared at the princess with her eyes wide open.
Are you sure that nothing really happened?
Luna asked again. When she caught sight of the jewelry box in Set's hand, she tilted her head in confusion. Sej just evaded her prying eyes and made up an excuse.
It's nothing. This was just going to be a birthday present, but I thought it was not suitable enough for him, so I brought it back.
Sej really wished that Luna would just leave it at that, but the look on her face was saying that she didn't believe Sej and wanted to ask further. She was like a hound chasing after a scent, refusing to let go of the trail.
Did anyone else come to the birthday dinner?
Luna persisted again with her questions. Sej shook her head.
Only Orson.
Aside from Rayton, Lise, and Sej, only Grand Chamberlain Orson had been in attendance, but even then he only stood by to deliver the Emperor's message.
I see.
Luna clicked her tongue.
So he did it again this year.
It turns out that the Emperor always summoned Lise to his palace on Rayton's birthday. Normally, there were two reasons why he would call for her on that day. Firstly, he didn't want to see Rayton in person, and secondly, he didn't like it when Lise held birthday parties for Rayton. Sej was told that this happened since Rayton held his only one guest birthday party. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed that Rayton's situation was actually more pitiful than hers. While Sej was lost in thought, Luna became worried again because Sej had mentioned Orson. When Sej asked why she looked so concerned, Luna told her it was because Orson was close to her biological mother, Yerina. But was there anyone in this palace who wasn't close to her mother? Luna had already been anxious enough to find out that Sej had gone to Rayton's birthday party, and hearing that Orson had been there only worsened her fears. The situation was bound to become more chaotic, but Sej, of course, had no idea about what that entailed. If Yerina were to find out about this, Sej anticipated that she would be beaten like a helpless dog to a vicious master. In the past, she would have shivered in fear, but not now. She had suffered through her mother's punishments before, so this time likely wouldn't be that scary. Sej reasoned that she could get away with getting hit a few times. Unbeknownst to her, she really would be beaten like a dog. Yerina arrived at Set's palace early in the morning.
You insolent bitch.
Sej was jolted from her sleep in a daze. Yerina's slap knocked her back onto the bed. Her cheeks were tingling red.
There's a limit to how much you can deceive me. How dare you celebrate Rayton's birthday?
Yerina snatched Sej by her shiny blonde hair and yanked with such force that the girl tumbled from the bed onto the floor.
Lady Yerina.
Luna rushed in, her face quite blue. She carefully moved to block Yerina, who had again slapped Sej on the cheek.
I beg you, please calm down. Please.
Sej looked up at Luna's back while touching her throbbing cheek. Before she had a return to her younger self, Sej had always been terrified of Yerina's wrath, and Luna would have to intervene and protect Sej this way every time. Many things have changed since then, however. Sej had even experienced death and returned to life, after all. Of course, the situation right now was still quite difficult to deal with, but it was nowhere near as bad as before. She had already become accustomed to Yerina's lashes.
Luna. You are the same, you insolent bitch.
Mother, I was wrong. If you want to scold me, just scold me, but don't do this to Luna.
Yerina kicked Sej in the stomach way before Sej could finish her sentence. Sej hugged her torso and whimpered. Yerina didn't feel even an ounce of remorse for her actions against her daughter, all the while glaring at Sej with wide eyes. She looked like a raging hippopotamus.
It was such an eyesore that I had to see her, and now you just joined her side.
Yerina was livid that her own daughter dared to fraternize with that bitch Lise and that cursed Rayton. Yerina's dislike for the other concubine and her son was exceedingly obvious, and she held no fondness for Sej either. From Yerina's point of view, it seemed as if all the unsavory things around her stuck to one another, so Sej understood why Yerina said that Sej deceived her. Unlucky things shouldn't stay together. Yerina was a woman with great ambition, and the size of these complex yet unlucky things around her sticking together was as big as her ambition. The emperor continued to favor Lise, who had borne him a son. Meanwhile, Yerina only had a daughter. If the emperor had perhaps paid more attention to and slept with Yerina several times a year, she probably wouldn't have needed to unleash her anger onto Sej like this. Yerina had been sent to the imperial palace before Lise, but beyond that she couldn't receive the emperor's favor. To add insult to injury, she hadn't been able to conceive any children with him. It was a miracle that she even managed to become pregnant and bring Sej into this world in the first place. A few years after she entered the imperial palace, Yerina slept with the drunken emperor for the first time since their first night. Her actions resulted in a daughter, Sej. Though it was not the best outcome, having Princess Sej was far better than having a cursed son. And Sej had some potential use for the future, so the circumstances were not that bad. If Sej was able to marry into a good family, the alliance could bring Yerina some benefit later, as someone sometimes told her in a comforting voice. Whenever Yerina heard it though, she would always beat Sej within an inch of her life, again and again. In her eyes, Sej was not that pretty and had no social skills, so Yerina frequently disciplined and abused her to near death for her poor performances in social gatherings. Because of the constant violence that Yerina exacted upon Sej, the poor girl grew more slowly than her peers. When she was even younger than she was now, she suffered from social anxiety, depression, and aphasia. These conditions only exacerbated Yerina's opinion of her, so in Yerina's eyes, Sej was nothing but a useless bitch. Chapter 14, Stop. I'm fine, too. Someone once said, if the idealism is too grand and the reality can't keep up, people will become angry and want to find someone to vent their anger. For Yerina, that conflict between the ideal and reality was Sej's only daughter.
You were stuck in the palace, so here I thought you must be reading books in the library. Instead, you and that Rayton guy were flirting with each other there.
I'm still 12 years old. I'm too young for that.
Sej thought her mother's paranoid idea made no sense at all.
And you had to do that with Rayton, not in another place, but Liza's palace.
Mother, I was wrong.
You were hanging out with Rayton, so I'm sure you must be planning something against me, right? You stupid, useless bitch.
Oh, that's why you're doing this to me.
Yerina's suspicions weren't entirely unfounded. If Sej thought about the situation from the emperor's point of view, he didn't like Rayton, so he would naturally be wary of those who chose to be close to the prince. Since the emperor had never looked at Yerina properly, let alone favor her, it was no wonder that Yerina was so frightened that she would be cast out of the emperor's gaze entirely because of Set's friendship with Rayton.
I didn't think that far. I got bored because I was alone in the imperial palace. That's why
If you're bored, you should just read books like you always do.
I didn't think she would listen to any of my excuses. So at times like this, it would be better for me to just stay still and get hit. If I say any more than this or accidentally utter something that I shouldn't, she will hit me more for talking back to her. My past experiences already showed me that much.
Sej could only sob as she endured a beating, her face soaked with tears. Luna's heart broke as she watched the young girl weep, so she clenched her teeth and mustered up the courage to stand and stop Yerina. Sej yanked at the hem of Luna's dress. Sej and Luna stared at each other. Sej quietly formed some words with her lips.
Stop. I'm fine.
Luna widened her eyes, surprised. Nonetheless, she yielded, and Sej silently received Yerina's beating.
If this happens again, I will pull out your hair.
Yerina had already struck her 18 times, in other words, she would end her beating soon. Sej lifted her head slightly, just enough to meet her mother's eyes. She was agitated and her breathing was rough.
She will only hit me until she gets tired. It's going to end soon.
Yerina once again dragged Sej by the hair. The sudden, sharp pain made her scream. Wasn't she tired already and going to put an end to this soon?
You're really going to hit me again.
Sej started panicking to herself and Set's face slammed into one of her bedposts.
No, princess.
Sej raised her head blankly as she heard Luna's scream.
I can feel something flowing through my nose. It seems like a nosebleed, and the blood must be flowing very well.
Yerina didn't mean to go this far, and now she seemed a little flustered. But Yerina was not a brave and noble soul who would apologize for her mistakes. She stared at Luna, whose face was pallid and blue, and at Sej, who sat absent-mindedly next to the bedpost before making her way out to leave them alone.
That's great. You won't be able to leave the Imperial Palace with a face like that. You brought this upon yourself.
And then she left.
Princess.
Luna's voice was quivering. Sej stared at her own blood, which was soaking the carpet, instead of answering her lady-in-waiting.
Yerina is right. I'll never get out from the Imperial Place. But I have to meet Rayton today. It's going to be my first time learning the Kazaki language from him.
Your Highness, let's call a doctor.
Is my mother gone?
What?
She is gone, right?
Luna rose from her position and checked the hallway. She understandably looked like she was afraid of Yerina, too.
Yes, she is gone. So please take it easy and lay down in the bed. Your Highness?
Luna widened her eyes in surprise. Sej suddenly ripped a strip of cloth from the bottom of her dress, rolled it up, and put in her nostrils.
Luna, I will be going out for a while.
Princess. What do you mean? Didn't you hear what Lady Yerina said?
Luna's face grew exhausted and she looked as if she was about to collapse.
I am so sorry for making you worry for 2 days in a row, but I can't help it.
Sej glanced at Luna with her messy hair and squeezed her hand. She talked to her in a serious voice.
I'm really fine, so please don't worry about it.
It's not like this has only happened once or twice before, right?
Princess.
I am very thankful for your concern, but please don't get in front of me next time. It's okay for me to get hit, but I can't stand it if Luna gets hit for me. There will be a tea party soon, so I'm sure Mother and the others won't be back at least until this afternoon. I'll be home before dinner. I promise you.
I'll be right back, Luna.
Sej muttered those words while opening the door and stepping out into the hallway. Luna was left alone and dazed.
Was she really the same princess whom I've always known? Was she? I want to believe it. But where are you going, though?
Luna stared at the door blankly with her mouth agape. She only belatedly realized that Sej hadn't told her the place that she was heading to. Sej quickened her pace as she made her way to the West Library. She hadn't been given an exact time for the tutoring. The last time she had seen Rayton in the library was early in the morning, but now, it was almost noon. He already didn't want to teach her Kazaki in the first place. She was so worried that he would cancel her tutoring under the pretense that she didn't show up for their meeting on time. Sej was walking in a hurry, so her breathing was rough and heavy. This morning had been the first in forever that she was beaten so severely like a dog, and now her head was dizzy. She usually got slapped on the cheek a few times, not kicked or knocked into a bedpost. Her nosebleed seemed like it was never going to stop. The wad of cloth that she had stuffed into her nostrils had become saturated with blood and lost its absorptive function. Sej sighed and ripped a strip from the bottom of her dress again and stuffed it into her nostrils. She couldn't believe that she was doing something so unbecoming and stupid. She wished she had asked Luna to bring her some proper cloth at least before she left, but she couldn't even think about that now because she was in a hurry. Sej staggered and finally reached the door to the library. Today, no one was present in the West Library. She walked past the entrance and made her way through bookshelves. She continued forward toward the innermost part of the library, near the large window. She patted her chest to ease her nervousness. Once there, she saw that someone was already sitting there. Of course, that must be the main hero of this story, Rayton. Sej stood in front of him.
Big brother.
Then she continued her sentence in a bright voice.
I'm here.
Rayton had his eyes fixed on the book in front of him, but his forehead made a distorted wrinkle. He raised his head after saying some curse words like damn it, or holy fuck. But then he put on a strange expression. Chapter 15. Her first lessons with Rayton. 1.
I'm so sorry I'm late to the first day of lessons. I wasn't planning to be late, actually.
Sej paused for a good moment to carefully consider what she should say next.
I thought I could come up with a good excuse, but I can't think of anything right now. There's no way I can possibly tell him that I'm late because my mother was busy beating me like a dog.
After rolling her eyes and racking her brain for anything that sounded at least somewhat plausible, she decided to settle on a common excuse for tardiness.
Well, I, overslept, and...
Overslept?
Rayton laughed at her paltry explanation. His expression was so cold.
You must be a terrible and ridiculously deep sleeper. If you look like that after oversleeping once.
At that moment, Sej realized that she had run out of her room without checking her appearance first. Honestly, she was in such a hurry to see him that she hadn't even known about what she looked like until Rayton pointed it out.
My cheeks were only a little swollen, and my nose bled a little here and there. Other than that, the pain is nothing much. Yarina did hit me more than usual today, but it couldn't have made that much of a difference, could it?
Sej glanced at her reflection in the window behind Rayton. The clean, well-polished glass clearly revealed the extent of her abused face back to her. Only then did she realize that she looked quite awful indeed. Her cheeks were, of course, very swollen, along with her nose and frankly the rest of her face. There was a streak of dried blood staining the skin adjacent to her mouth. A blue patch had begun to discolor her forehead, likely a bruise forming from where Yarina had slammed her face into the bedpost. She really did look like someone had just about beaten her to death. Sej could only stare in shock. She had never looked like this before, even after all the beatings she endured in her past life.
Oh, but I can still study.
Sej stammered, anxious that Rayton would tell her off any minute now for her unbecoming appearance and dismiss her like last time.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all.
She insisted.
So you don't have to worry.
Worry?
Rayton scoffed.
Who's worried about you?
The younger girl pouted her lips.
If you don't care, then let's not talk about it. Just pretend you didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I'm getting embarrassed for no reason here.
Sej grumpily thought to herself that he had unfairly made her self-conscious, but she tried to hide her annoyance from him anyway since she didn't want to derail the session any further. Curious about what they would be discussing that day, if anything, Set's gaze started to wander around the room before suddenly landing on a pile of books in front of the window. The stack of fascinating and mysterious-looking texts that she normally saw Rayton reading in that windowsill was long gone and instead replaced by a different set. An Introduction to Kazaki. Understanding Kazaki Language. Kazaki for Beginners. Despite the immense reluctance Rayton had demonstrated during his birthday dinner, he seemed to be an obedient son after all. No matter how much he hated the idea, he still followed Lisa's instructions to teach Sej Kazaki. Rayton silently peered at her as she looked expectantly at him. Wordlessly, he grabbed the set of books and rose from his seat. He started walking down the hall before settling himself at a seat with an accompanying desk on the other side of the room. Sej followed him as quickly as her petite legs could carry her. As Rayton sat down, Sej hesitantly pulled out the chair beside him and quickly glanced at his reaction.
I think I can sit next to him. Fortunately, he isn't saying I have to get out.
Filled with a sense of relief, Sej started to clamber up the seat. Because of her lamentably short stature, even doing something as simple as sitting in a chair sometimes turned out to be quite the effort for her. This chair, like much of the furnishings in the imperial palace, were suited for taller, healthier occupants, not someone as malnourished and mistreated as Sej.
Ah,
As soon as she seated herself on the chair, she tried to right herself and her feet became twisted, causing her to fall to the floor rather unceremoniously. Since returning to her younger form, Sej found many things much more tiresome than before. For instance, whoever chose the design for the chairs in this library didn't have any consideration for children at all, she thought with ire. She sighed and settled herself on the seat once more while mulling on her situation with annoyance. Unbeknownst to her, Rayton had watched the entire escapade unfold in front of him.
big brother, what? What should I do first?
Sej reached for a nearby pen and laughed awkwardly in an attempt to diffuse the tense atmosphere between them. Rayton didn't answer her. Instead, he just glared at her, like he always did, as if she was the most irritating person in the world. Some time had passed since they finally managed to begin the lessons. She couldn't believe that Rayton was really tutoring her in Kazaki. Whatever he talked about with Lise seemed to have really convinced him.
To be honest, the instructions he's giving are so vague. He only said, this one is like this, and that one is like that. Well, I can't really say that I'm surprised, since I already expected he would do something like this. But this attention still doesn't mean that he is going to be kind to me from now on. Right now, he's literally just giving me a private lesson because his mother asked him to, nothing more.
She never once in her life experienced such a self-centric tutor. Far from teaching her basic consonants and vowels, Rayton quizzed her on subjects that would have been more appropriate for someone on an intermediate level. Sej suspected that he was purposefully trying to overwhelm her with difficult questions so that he could make an excuse to say something like, "It's ridiculous to teach Kazaki to a girl like you." But she did have a trump card that Rayton didn't know about. In actuality, she could already speak Kazaki well since she had taken the time to study it in her previous life. Rayton seemed surprised that Sej was somehow able to keep pace with his challenging curriculum. His plan to discourage her had gone awry.
It never crossed my mind before, but now I can use my knowledge of Kozaki to find somewhere to live outside the palace in the future. These lessons are necessary for me to live a long and prosperous life. No, rather, I must do this so my life can continue this time. Learning Kozaki again isn't that bad, and I need to do this so I can achieve my goal of getting close to Rayton. I'll try my best to get his attention as much as I can, even if it's just a little bit.